We started a little earlier today, and I thought that was a good crowd at the session previously, at the breakfast session. I'd like to very briefly introduce Ralph Stanley, who's head of the Urban Mass Transit Administration at the Department of Transportation, a good friend of the American Conservative Union, has worked at the White House and elsewhere, and I'll turn the podium over to him to conduct the program and to introduce your speaker here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning. Elizabeth Dole has been serving the cause of freedom and the public interest since she first arrived in Washington. A graduate of Duke University and Harvard Law School, she first held a number of posts where she worked in the defense of a free, competitive market that was nevertheless fair to the consumer. Appointed to the Federal Trade Commission in 1973, Elizabeth Dole continued her efforts to maximize free competition and eliminate the unfair practices that disrupt the free marketplace. She began her service to President Reagan as his assistant for public liaison, where she was critical in forming the coalitions that supported the budget and tax cuts of the first term. After a unanimous Senate confirmation in February of 1983, Secretary Dole brought her campaign for a free enterprise system, unencumbered by extensive government regulation, to the Department of Transportation. As a result of her efforts, transportation, a field that was once thought to be beyond the reach of a competitive market, has seen the benefits that deregulation can generate for businesses and consumers alike. As her former Chief of Staff, and working for her currently as the head of the Urban Mass Transportation Administration, I can personally attest that the President has no greater supporter, the free market no stronger ally, and the American people no finer public servant. It is therefore with great pride that I introduce to you now this individual who has brought about so many positive changes and whom I am sure will be responsible for so many others to come, the Secretary of Transportation, Elizabeth Dole.
Thank you, Ralph. Appreciate it. That's great. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And Ralph, thank you for that warm introduction. I'd have to tell you that one of the joys of being involved in public service is the opportunity to work with such fine young professionals as Ralph Stanley. He's doing an outstanding job as the UMTA administrator, and together we are trying to find ways to refine and to bring more order out of some of the chaos that's existed in the past with regard to funding for mass transit projects. So I'm delighted that Ralph is here today, and Dave Keene and so many others who are good friends, and I'm just so pleased to have the opportunity to visit with you on some issues that I think are of mutual concern to all of us in the transportation area. I have to share one little story with you because just before I left, I was talking with Mac Baldridge, the Secretary of Commerce, and I indicated that I was going to be talking about deregulation this morning, among other issues. And Mac said, well, speaking of deregulation, Elizabeth, he said a rather strange thing happened recently. He said at the Commerce Department, you know, we do a census of small business, agriculture, and other areas, as well as the big national census. And he said we were doing our small business census, and we sent out forms to sole proprietors all around the country. And he said, I got a rather strange response from a businessman down in your state of North Carolina. He said the first question was, list number of employees, broken by age and sex. And the answer came back, none. But alcoholism is a real problem for us. Max said, you know, if there was anybody in the country who didn't think it was time to turn around the forces of regulation and begin to deregulate at the federal level, that sure would prove it to them. But indeed, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the vanguard of a great new age of invention and human development. Ours is a time of renewal generated by American free enterprise and challenged by risk and spurred by competition. The American dream of human progress through freedom and equality of opportunity and competitive enterprise, President Reagan has said, is still the most revolutionary idea in the world today. And he correctly adds, and it's also the most successful. Economic freedom not only serves human needs, economic freedom is a human need. You and I understand that freedom in human action is a seamless fabric. A person's freedom to choose and act in the marketplace is as integral to his well-being as his social freedom, his intellectual freedom, his freedom of conscience. It is this current and coherent understanding of human nature that has equipped American conservatives to accept a powerful mandate for leadership. And I am privileged to help direct one part of America's economic and political rebirth through deregulation and privatization of the transportation sector of our economy. After all, transportation is not just concrete and steel ribbons reaching to the horizons or the clattering of subways beneath the city streets. Transportation is our economy in motion. From horse-drawn carriages to the space shuttle of today, it has served and it serves the needs of people everywhere. It assures the flow of food from farm to market, raw materials from mine to factory, products from assembly line to market shelves, and certainly it is a very important component in our national defense system. The history of American transportation has been one of bold creativity that time and again brought revolutionary improvement to the lives of people the world over. Dreamers, inventors, and entrepreneurs, geniuses such as Robert Fulton, Henry Ford, and the Wright brothers have indeed changed world civilization unalterably. Transportation in America is an $800 billion industry. It accounts for about 1/4 of our gross national product. It is part of the cost of everything companies produce and every item that consumers buy. In short, transportation is essential to our economy, but no one wants to pay more for it than is necessary, and they shouldn't. We expect carriers to operate as efficiently as possible and shippers to bargain for the best rates. These goals, we have found, are best accomplished in an economic climate of private ownership and deregulation. Our free market transportation industry now is venturing into the limitless reaches of space. I was delighted last fall when President Reagan asked that I establish an Office of Space Transportation in the Department of Transportation to promote private sector investment in commercial unmanned expendable launch vehicles. And you know, I'll never forget one lady at the time that the announcement was made came up to me and she said, "Oh, Mrs. Dole, isn't that exciting? You're going into space transportation. You'll probably be one of the first people to go up in space." And I said, "Well, I certainly hope not, because these rockets don't come back. They're expendable launch vehicles." But the department has been working vigorously, believe it or not, to deregulate, to help this fledgling new industry to be able to compete without all the massive regulations and red tape that exists now. We're trying to cut through the thicket of clearances, licenses, and regulations emanating from 17 government agencies that keeps commercial space vehicles tethered to their pads. The President himself described our initiative best right here at Cpac last year. American private enterprise, he said, will be blasting off toward new horizons of hope, adventure, and progress, a future that will dazzle our imagination and lift our spirits. Yes, President Reagan promised to restore our economic freedoms, and I'm here to tell you that in transportation we have had impressive results. We've already taken most of the steps needed to untangle a 50-year accumulation of red tape that had been choking our transportation industries and sapping their initiative. You know, it's interesting, things sort of go full cycle. When I was a commissioner on the Federal Trade Commission back in the early 70s, we were the first in government to speak out for deregulation. And we at that time, thank you. At that time, we decided we should clean our own house first, and we looked at our regulations, and we found 145 at the Federal Trade Commission that were no longer serving the public interest. And you know, there were a couple of regulations that were regulating industries that no longer existed. So we rescinded many of our regulations and cleaned our own house, and then we began to intervene before the CAB and the ICC and other agencies to promote competition in the marketplace rather than more regulation. Head-to-head competition that will produce lower prices and lower rates, better quality goods, and more choices for consumers in the marketplace. So I'm delighted to be going full cycle in this area of deregulation and to see it at a later stage and have an opportunity to move it along a little more rapidly. But we would not have realized this success had it not been for the efforts of conservative intellectuals, opinion leaders, and grassroots activists. There's no question about it. Our work, though, ladies and gentlemen, is unfinished. And unless conservative activists do their very utmost at the grassroots level, our progress toward fully liberating the transportation economy could be halted. In fact, it could even be reversed. The most stunning success story for transportation consumers, and I'm sure you'll agree, has been with airline deregulation. American air travel has been so revolutionized that I find it hard to believe that less than a decade ago, it made no real difference which airline one chose to fly to a given destination. The cost was going to be the same, with only the most marginal variations in service. Today, United States air travelers have a wonderful new freedom to choose between low-fare, no-frills service or high-priced luxury service, or any offering from the broadening spectrum in between. There are all kinds of choices out there today. The evidence is clearly in. The evidence is incontestable. The Depression-era regime of regulation imposed on our air carriers was holding them back from heights of imaginative consumer service to which they had been destined to soar. Deregulation has transformed an industry long shielded by the government from real price competition and new competitors. It suggests the continuing validity of at least one economic theory, that a little competition is a good thing, and a lot is much better still. Henry Ford, who was no stranger to innovation, used to compare American business to the chicken, which is never healthier than when it has to scratch around a little for what it gets. Today, the flock is more diverse than ever. There are more air carriers in operation throughout America, and more airlines flying what we usually think of as big aircraft to more places. It's no coincidence, nor is it any surprise to me, that the airlines are now sharing in the economic recovery that we're enjoying nationally. In air travel, it is the risk takers, not the regulators, who have launched an exciting new era of socioeconomic change. Price competition has brought about a dramatic increase in the ability of moderate and lower income Americans to afford the speed and convenience of air travel. Our society has accomplished this tremendous improvement in the quality of life for the majority of our people precisely by overthrowing a regime of regulation and subsidy and giving freedom a chance. One detail of unfinished business in air deregulation is the subsidy for so-called essential air service. Now, at the time that the 1978 Act was passed to deregulate the airlines, there was a bridge-over provision that small communities that had been receiving certificated air service would continue to receive that service for a 10-year period through a transition to a deregulated society. We would like to end that transition period 3 years sooner than the existing deadline because we feel the job is done. If we cut this subsidy now, instead of 3 years from now, we can save the taxpayers $50 million a year. And certainly, the transition is basically accomplished. The transition to today's deregulated air transport market did not take place effortlessly. The results, however, are already so favorable to consumers, and they're becoming more and more favorable to the industry as it establishes rational new cost and marketing structures, that there can simply be no turning back. Since 1978, air carriers have cut costs and they've passed on savings to consumers. And recent figures show that those savings to consumers since 1978 up until last year amount to $10 billion. That's pretty good in reduced fares. The end result of air deregulation is truly a quantum increase in opportunity for consumers and entrepreneurs alike. And with the demise of regulation, we have presided over the sunset, the closing, of the first federal agency in 50 years. And that was quite a milestone. In fact, there was some effort last year to sort of pick up the CAB and transfer it to the Department of Transportation. And I got in there and said, listen, the President wants sunset. That means only the residual functions will come to the FTC. We don't want to just pick it up and put it over at DOT. So we do have some functions that are remaining. We had hoped that they would go to some other agencies as well, consumer protection to the FTC, for example, since it handles all other consumer issues, and antitrust immunity to the Justice Department. But I ended up with all of it. And we have put it in different parts of the department so that there is not a CAB component as such, but it is integrated into other aspects scattered across the department. So indeed, the CAB has been sunsetted. Now, the same free market principles that have worked such wonders in the air transport market apply just as validly to other forms of transportation. In the rail, trucking, bus transport, and maritime industries, we have been working toward further deregulation, and urgent and important matters on the administration's transportation agenda include not only breaking the habit of regulation in these areas, but also bringing an end to costly subsidies and to government ownership of businesses that belong in the private sector. We are not overlooking, ladies and gentlemen, a single area where we can introduce the discipline of the market and produce savings for the taxpayers. We're engaged in a fundamental reassessment of what the federal government's role should be in transportation. And as I submitted my 1986 budget for transportation, and as I've been testifying on the Hill this past week, I've been stressing that indeed it is a matter of reordering this whole idea. What should the federal government's role be? It's not just to make changes for 1 year. It's to make changes in structure that will last far beyond 1 year. We are looking to continuing in the federal level those areas that have a national impact. But where it has more a local or state impact, for example, in the area of mass transit, there are major cutbacks. And indeed, I think that's the way it should be. As we're trying to get this deficit down, we have got to reorder what the federal government's role should be in transportation. We're also looking to increase the amount of user fees in our budget. Now, I am one who happens to believe that those who use a particular service ought to pay for it. I think that makes sense. Why should all taxpayers pay for a service that only a few are actually benefiting from? So I'm very proud that 70% of my current budget is based on user fees. Only a very small percent, 30%, comes from general revenues. But if we get what we want in the fiscal year 86 budget, we'll go to 85% user fees, because we're going to start charging user fees for a number of the Coast Guard's functions if I can convince the Congress to go with me. And I would certainly appreciate your help as we take on these tough issues with the Congress. I think it makes a lot of sense to, for example, to have those who use the regatta fees, the regatta area, they should be the ones paying for that. The ones who are using services on the waterways that the rest of us are not participating in, let's let them pick up the fee for those services. So if you'll get in there and help me, I think we can win it. Now, the President declared in his State of the Union message that the administration will continue to remove restraints on the bus and railroad industries, and that we will seek further deregulation of the trucking industry. Each of you and your organizations back home, again, can be very, very helpful as we pursue these goals this year. We're in the process right now of finalizing legislation to complete trucking deregulation. And we must not take it for granted that deregulation's political momentum is sufficiently strong. There is still significant opposition to further deregulation of trucking. Likewise, there is an organized effort right now to re-regulate the railroads. If we do not remain vigilant and energetic on these issues, our cause could suffer some stunning reversals. And the cause is not ours alone. What is at stake is the economic well-being of all Americans. Now, another of my goals is defederalization, transferring federal government functions and property to state and local authorities, as I've mentioned. And I've asked the Congress this year to transfer the 2 federally owned airports here in Washington, National Airport and Dulles International, to a local authority. And that's going to take some help when we get to hearings on the Hill as well. I was sitting at my desk one day, and thinking about the fact that there are really only 2 major airports run by the federal government. And it just seemed to me, here I was determining what the police should be paid at National Airport and issues of that sort. And it just seemed to me that the time is right to move out and try to set up a local entity to take over the authority to run these airports. That should not be the federal government running airports. So what I did was to set up an advisory committee to tell me not whether, but how to transfer these airports to local jurisdiction. They have reported back to me at the end of December. Once again, we're working on legislation to send to the Hill, and I think this will be another positive step in transportation policy. For I strongly believe that the federal government should not be calling the shots or looking over the shoulders of local officials on airport issues. Now, conservative voices also must ring loud and clear in support of our effort to end costly subsidies to Amtrak, which carries, ladies and gentlemen, only 2% of intercity travel and traffic. The President emphasized this issue, too, in his State of the Union message. He pointed out that taxpayers pay about $35 per passenger every time an Amtrak train leaves the station. On some routes, the taxpayer's portion of the fare is much, much higher, outrageously high. On one Amtrak route, the subsidy averages $140 per passenger. It's well worth recognizing, too, that the average Amtrak rider is far from needy. Amtrak riders tend to be middle and upper income earners. 55% of Northeast Corridor passengers, and that's the heaviest traveled, in 1983 had incomes above $30,000. And much of Amtrak's Northeast Corridor traffic is business travel. Quite simply, my goal is to get the federal government out of the railroad business. This year, we've sold the Alaska Railroad to the state of Alaska, so the Treasury is $23 million richer. We seek to end Amtrak subsidies, as I've mentioned, and we seek to sell the largest federal rail enterprise, Conrail. Now, I want to spend my remaining time basically talking about the Conrail sale, because that's a very important one in a number of ways, and again, I seek your help. I need your help as we move through the Congress. We're in the midst of hearings right now on this subject. The Conrail sale is much more than a transportation issue. Our economy and government will be feeling the repercussions of the Conrail decision for many years to come, for a critical conservative policy idea is at stake, the idea of privatization. You've probably heard that expression in connection with Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's splendid program of transferring responsibility for many services now provided by government agencies to private profit-making enterprises. Our proposal to sell Conrail is the first major legislative test of privatization at the federal level in the United States. Conrail has existed as property of the U.S. government since 1976, when Congress came to the rescue of 7 bankrupt or failing rail companies in the Northeast and the Midwest. The taxpayers have spent several $billion keeping it in operation. But Congress never intended that Conrail permanently remain under government ownership. And Conrail's turned a profit for the last 5 years. Now, granted, they turned a profit with the assistance of the federal government paying their labor protection. Last year, we paid $77 million. They turned a profit with the help of the employees who gave them wage concessions of 12%, and they're not paying state taxes. So all of us are contributing to Conrail having turned a profit, but they have good management that's used the tools that the Congress gave them, and indeed, Conrail has been turned around. Now, it's not fair for Conrail to keep competing with other railroads with all those special benefits, is it? It's time to return it to the private sector, and that's what I'm about. That's what I'm doing. Now, we were told in the Northeast Rail Assistance Act of 1981, the Secretary of Transportation, to develop a plan to submit to the Congress as to how this railroad should be returned to the private sector. I came into office in February of 1983, and I've been proceeding very carefully all this time through a negotiated competitive bid process. And we had 15 bidders who stepped up and put an offer on the table to buy Conrail. Once I had those 15 bids, I began to negotiate. First of all, we cut it down to 6. and then to 3, and then we began negotiating with those 3 finalists, and we were able to get the price up 20%, and also to get a lot of tough covenants built into the contracts with 3 finalists. Covenants designed to preserve the financial strength of the railroad so that never again will it be back on the federal government's doorstep. Just this past month, I announced my decision to sell Conrail to the Norfolk Southern Corporation, which is a highly profitable company which prides itself on having the highest operating and maintenance standards in the rail industry. Now it is Congress' turn to act. The taxpayers have much to gain from this sale. At the time of closing, Norfolk Southern will write me a check for $1.2 billion, cash on the barrelhead, which I will then put in the Treasury to help with that deficit. And that's just part of the payment. That's just part of the payment. Norfolk Southern will also give the government anything above $800 million in cash that the company may have at that point, and they will forego all of Conrail's net operating loss carry-forward benefits. That's worth about $2.1 billion to the in surrendering those, and $275 million in investment tax credits, which can be counted dollar for dollar, of course. So that is real value to the Treasury. And as I mentioned, Norfolk Southern has agreed to a set of very tough covenants which I negotiated designed to ensure that the railroad will be strong and healthy forever. Such things as you must put $500 million into capital each year, unless they fall on hard times, at which time the board of directors can determine to drop it to $350 million. They cannot defer their maintenance. They must have $500 million in cash in the company after they issue dividends. They can't issue dividends beyond 40% of their net earnings. These are the kinds of things that are designed to tie them down for 5 years so that we ensure that railroad is strong financially. Now, I might have gotten more money for this railroad had I not insisted on those covenants, but I felt the priorities were first to preserve the strong, healthy railroad and preserve that service to the key states that have been using it. Also, to preserve the shipping patterns, and thirdly, maximize the return to the government in light of those 2 criteria. And I think these covenants are essential to the public interest. They'll preserve quality service, they'll protect Conrail shippers, and they'll ensure that continued financial strength that's so important. Now, some critics of our plan are seeking to delay and maybe even block the plan altogether. So I say again, I really need your help on this. Some members of Conrail management have proposed that Conrail be sold only through a public stock offering. And I want to take just a moment to talk about that, because I carefully examined that option early on. I had Goldman Sachs, our investment advisor, look at it thoroughly. And Goldman Sachs advised me that if your mandate is to do what is in the public interest, to preserve service for all of the 15 states that utilize Conrail, to preserve those shipping patterns, then you go with a negotiated bid process, not a public offering. And the reason that they advised me in that way is several-fold, but let me just use the Conrail management example, the plan that they submitted. They would offer $1.4 billion, but they do that by taking $300 million cash out of the company to pay the government. Then they would offer a $500 million common stock offering. There have only been 10 in the country over $300 million, ever. And only one initial public offering, which this is, and that was Ford Motor Company back in 1956. Now, while Conrail has certainly been turned around and it is making a profit, Conrail is no Ford Motor Company. There's a big difference in the stock. So we start with that premise that we've only had 10 in the country over $300 million, and only one initial public offering, which was over $300 million. And this would be an initial public offering of $500 million in common stock and $600 million in preferred stock. The preferred stock would be the biggest in history to offer that much in preferred stock. And I think the bottom line is that to pay the dividends, which have to be promised to make that stock attractive enough to put it on the public, out for public offering, Conrail would have to borrow $400 million over the next 4 years, and that violates my covenants right away on the dividends. So indeed, that would not be in the public interest. Now, We could talk further about Conrail, but in the interest of time, let me just say that I do think it's a very, very important issue because it's critical to the idea of privatization. Our plan would get the government immediately, once and for all, out of the railroad business, and I think it would set a very good precedent for other areas as we move in this direction. So I hope you'll be in there with me, helping through your organizations, because difficult political hurdles do lie ahead. Leading conservatives here in Washington recognize that we have some political hurdles to cross, and they are mobilizing. Ed Fulner of the Heritage Foundation, Ken Bohm of Citizens for Reagan, Paul Wyrick of Coalitions for America, Dave Keene of the American Conservative Union, Bob Heckman of the Fund for a Conservative Majority, Fred Smith of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and the National Forum Foundation chaired by Senator Jeremiah Denton. These are some of the conservative leaders and organizations who have already rallied to the cause. Privatizing Conrail deserves a place at the very top of the conservative movement's agenda for 1985, not just here in Washington, but in the states at the grassroots, because if we succeed, the movement toward privatization will most certainly gain vitality. And our success or failure in liberating America's transportation economy will have effects far beyond our borders. And I'd like to make one final point as I close. International trade and travel is projected to accelerate through the remainder of this century. Because so much overseas transportation involves American carriers, our ideas and successful practice of deregulation are actually exporting themselves. I've had the wonderful opportunity to meet twice with Prime Minister Thatcher in the last year. When I was in England to speak to the Adam Smith Society, I had an opportunity to sit down and to discuss deregulation and privatization. And then last week when she came to Washington, she honored me with a visit to the Department of Transportation. Margaret Thatcher's Britain may be well ahead of the other West European nations in transferring transportation activities to the free market. But the others are beginning to grasp the good sense of the idea. Last year, after my visit to England, I traveled on to Oslo to discuss America's free enterprise transportation policies before the European Council of Ministers of Transport. A good many democratic socialists were among the participants. Some of them confronted me with the familiar notion that government subsidies, government controls, government monopolies were necessary to satisfy the demands of social justice, to meet human needs. I was able to respond that economic freedom serves human needs most fairly and most efficiently. I was able to answer that ours was not just an abstract doctrine. Experience proves our conviction that economic freedom not only serves human needs, it is a human need. Or, as a Norwegian poet put it, freedom and life are one, as simple, as indispensable as breathing itself. Today, America's transportation industries, together with every other sector of our economy, are energized by new freedom and new competition, and they are satisfying human needs and aspirations. Those who succeed in the new marketplace must put aside the conventional wisdom suited to earlier times. The traveling public and shippers will now decide who is efficient and who is not. They are no longer merely along for the ride. They are in the driver's seat. There's a touch of irony in all this. Deregulation, when we really stop to think about it, is a revolutionary idea, but it is not newborn. In fact, it was one of the first principles of our founding fathers who believed supply and demand, competition and creativity were the most efficient regulators of our society and the surest providers of both social justice and individual dignity. For as long as we have called ourselves Americans, we have taken pride in our native ingenuity. We have displayed a willingness to take daring economic risks for great economic gains. We have placed our faith in a free market, disciplined by competition and tempered by a social justice. There is magic in the marketplace, President Reagan has said, and it works. I know that is your ideal, and I assure you it is mine. And I look forward to working with you as we go together on this journey to make basic changes in our economic and our transportation policies for the next decade, for all future. And I just want to thank you again for the opportunity to share these issues and these ideas with you today. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you, Ralph.
The Secretary is late for an appointment at the White House and has to get over there by 10:30. But I want to thank her for coming, and I think the message on transportation deregulation and competition is one that was long overdue. Thank you.
How are you?
What's approximately the timetable?
Bob, do you have a copy of the agenda?
I don't presume that this is the kind of thing where you want questions. No, I don't think so. 10:45.
All right, folks, we'll move on to the next panel. I thank you all for attending. My name is Robert Dolan. I'm the chairman of Young Americans for Freedom. We have experienced certainly an excellent first day for Cpac, being Thursday yesterday, and today, the second day of Cpac 85, certainly has proven to be as successful as I predicted. When we discuss friendship, without reference to any political philosophy or organizational ties, we certainly have certain parameters and characteristics by which we judge friendship. When the conservative movement looks to people in friendship, there are certain people who hold a certain status which generally is unequaled. The next speaker is one of the people who is allowed for days like this to occur. I am often asked by reporters whether or not it is chic to be a young conservative these days. And I say, if it is in fact chic to be a young conservative today, it is because of the battles that were fought by people like the next speaker, the patriots of a generation ago, maybe. The conservative movement is about vision for the United States. It is about where we will go in the future. Will we continue the decline that we saw occurring quite rapidly between 10 and 15 years ago? Or will we allow the growth and the possibility of prosperity for this country to continue, both economically, in the area of social reform, in the area of justice? There was no finer spokesperson for conservatism in these United States today. It's a great honor and a pleasure to introduce to you, for purposes of making an address and then answering some questions, a fine friend of Young Americans for Freedom, Mr. Bill Rusher.
Thank you, Bob. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you who have been attending these Cpac conferences over the years must know that the formula, at least as far as I am concerned, had become pretty cut and dry. Rusher was on a panel Saturday morning, usually about on the subject of where does conservatism go from here, or something like that. And so, in fact, it was arranged this year, although the topic was a little bit different, and eventually I found out the panel was supposed to be on Friday rather than Saturday. But then I got a call from Dave Keene saying that they wanted to change the formula. This year, I would, if I didn't mind, give what he called the keynote address at 10 o'clock on Friday morning. And I said, of course, I'd be glad to do so. I'm not quite sure whether this doesn't represent a case of up and out. I won't mind in the least being put back on that Saturday panel next year, if it comes to that. But meanwhile, I'm going to make the most of my opportunity and talk with you a little bit about where we have arrived in the conservative movement, and after that, where possibly we might go. Knowing your position on the historical curve is not always easy. In fact, more commonly than not, it's difficult. Nobody in the year 1210 turned to a friend and said, "You realize here we are right smack in the Middle Ages." Never thought. Caesar never said to Cleopatra, "You know, this ancient world isn't so bad." Lord knows what the 20th century will be called by students and historians in a few hundred years. But I can say this, that in terms of identifying where we are in the conservative movement, a certain perspective helps. There's no point to complaining about where you are on that historical curve in the conservative movement in the 1950s. We knew very well that we were practically nowhere at all. And because we had historical perspective, knew of other times when the situation had been different and better, and others still when it was worse, we could live with where the Lord had placed us along the time curve. And I think it is fair to say that we were confident that over the long haul, the conservative movement was going to get where it was going, or at least had a very good chance of doing so. What is not so easy to tell is how long all that's going to take. I have to tell you that it never occurred to me that I would see in my lifetime, and I think this is true of anybody who was active then. Bill Buckley was on record at the time as saying that it was not our destiny to enjoy those topical gratifications that others were able to get out of history who were going with it. He said we are to a certain extent out of spirit with history. He said that at our 5th anniversary dinner of National Review in 1960. And one of my regrets, frankly, is that some of the great fighters for conservatism haven't lived to see the real recent upsurge of the movement. I think of a man like Frank Meyer of National Review, who died in 1971, or former Governor Charles Edison of New Jersey, who so heavily backed the New York State Conservative Party, or many others that could be mentioned. We just have to say that they did not live to see Zion. But now that we have a president elected and re-elected, Ronald Reagan, and the movement as visibly large and articulated and intricate and busy as it is today, I think we have to appreciate that it is probably the case that the particular moment on the conservative curve, or at least one of the moments on the conservative curve that we happen now to be in, has a case to be called the Golden Age. Certainly, when I attended the Republican convention in Dallas last August, absolutely united. Conventions come in various sorts. There is the head-on collision. There is the rather moiling confusion of a second type. There is the unanimous renomination of an incumbent, as we had in Dallas. But even in 1956, when I attended the Republican convention in San Francisco and Eisenhower was renominated, there was a certain interest and excitement over whether or not Nixon was going to be renominated. And as it turned out, of course, he was, but at any rate, there seemed to be absolutely no doubt in Dallas. We were behind a leader for president and for vice president who were going to be renominated, no doubt about it. We had every reason to think they were going to go on to triumphant re-election, and there was a sense of apotheosis about that moment, not in Republican terms, but in conservative terms, that certainly going to be hard to beat. Because now, by virtue of our very strength, just by virtue of the fact that the conservative movement is so dominant in the Republican Party, in the words of the title of the first column I wrote after Dallas, now we split. This is a law of nature. The politically successful movement then begins to differentiate itself out in terms of those who want this emphasized and those who want that emphasized. It's perfectly natural that this should be so, natural and necessary that this should be so. But there's something special about that period of dominance and unanimity that I think deserves to be called the Golden Age. And I say that recognizing that temperamentally, there are some people who can't stand that thought. And we pick up a number of those, and they are good fighters in the conservative movement, the people with the siege mentality. They can't stand success. They joined the conservative movement because it was a loser, and they want it to stay a loser. And I hope he isn't here now, because he's an old friend of mine, but there is a fellow who has that kind of mentality, who I didn't even know was nearby, but he eased up onto a bar stool right next to me in a hotel at Dallas one night in August as I was having my little nightcap, and began to grumble. He was thoroughly dissatisfied with the job that Reagan had done. He recited the litany of all the things, and there certainly are plenty that remain to be done, and all the ways in which he had been disappointed. But what he really was gloomiest about was the advent in 1988 of the man he called Bushnikov. I was positively relieved when he changed the subject and started telling me that the entire American blood bank is contaminated by AIDS. It was he was miserable that night, sitting there in Dallas. Almost as bad is the old geezer who sits cackling by the fire, reminiscing about the bad old days. How wonderful it was back when we couldn't even get arrested on the streets of New York, and so on. And it wasn't all that bad because we had all the satisfactions that that those who participate in small, heuristic, forward-looking movements have. But having savored the entire spectrum, I guess, of conservative experiences, I much prefer the golden age, I assure you. Because much more than a change in parties is going on here. That's the least of it, that the Democrats are having trouble finding the solution to the presidential problem. Democrats have been around a long, long time. At one time or another, they have represented almost everything. They, early on, were the political spokesman of the slaveholders of the South. They can go in any one of a number of directions. They will, in due course, just by being patient, sitting out there for 50 years if they have to, find some combination and work their way back in. Liberalism is in more difficulty, it seems to me. And because liberalism is a point of view, not much of a point of view. Maybe it has always prided itself on its eclecticism. It wasn't terribly long on immutable principles. But it had, nonetheless, its characteristic flavor, and a terribly successful one, as you may recall. And this has changed. This has changed. We are in the political equivalent of something that compares to one of those Kondratiev long waves that they talk about in economics. The whole leadership of the country is changing. The institutions to which we look, the attitudes we have, the policies we pursue are a world away, in many cases 180 degrees diametrically opposed to the interests and the attitudes and the policies of even 15 or 20 years ago. The liberals, and this is one of the important points I would like to get across to you, are in a state approaching moral collapse. It's much more than just losing politically. A friend of mine said that he had been talking recently with a colonel who has done some studies of fighter plane tactics. And this colonel, having sort of gotten that subject under his belt, had generalized from the subject of fighter plane tactics to a general theory of warfare. And his theory of warfare had boiled down to this: that the moment when the winner in a contest is decided is not when the slashing move takes place or the decisive turn. It's the moment when one side achieves psychological dominance over the other. It may come along before or even after the dramatic move. But at some point, the steam simply goes out of the man or the cause that is going to lose. And that has happened, believe me, it has happened to liberalism. They know that their policies were tried fully. They know that those policies failed. Doesn't mean they have become conservatives. They're not necessarily convinced that ours are going to succeed, but they know that they have failed. Those who can, with dignity, go somewhere else have departed. That's the great majority, by the way. I debated during the campaign a professor who shall remain nameless here, who had agreed to take the Mondale side of the debate for money. But, well, and he's a lifelong liberal, or almost lifelong. He has now changed, and in the dinner before the debate and during questions after the debate, it became perfectly clear that this man is no longer a liberal. And one of the kids, I was standing right near him, one of the students came up to him after the debate and said, "Why have you stopped being a liberal?" He said, "Because it didn't work." That's a very common attitude among, as I say, liberals who can get up and walk away. Now, Joe Rao doesn't have that privilege. He's going to stay right there and insist that all we did was not try it hard enough. But they have lost, or we have acquired psychological dominance over them. Look at their position on various issues. On economic issues, during the campaign, they were absolutely down to the deficit. Now, you and I worry about the deficit, but to listen to liberals worrying about the deficit was a brand new experience for me. And I might add, I hope you'll treasure it because they have apparently stopped worrying about the deficit. Now that budget time is here, forget about it. Forget about it. They are out there hustling for every interest group, every subsidiary recipient that can make his way to Washington, D.C. or get a telegram here, and shedding tears over what the Reagan administration is doing to these people, the students in college, the farmers, the welfare recipients. Do you think it's any coincidence that 22 expert public health men and physicians have just issued a report 2 years in the making called the Physicians Task Force on Hunger in America? And it turns out that most of America makes Ethiopia look positively prosperous. It doesn't make much of a slogan when you are reduced to saying, as the liberals are today, the fetus does not scream. Have you ever tried to put that to music? Do you see how far they have come from the moral high ground that they used to occupy so consistently? All those years from Brother Can You Spare a Dime forward, they at least had the moral high ground. All that we ask is give peace a chance. And now they are down to that kind of argument on abortion. But where they have come furthest and fallen worst is on defense. About 2 years ago, at this time,
by drowning. The next night, her son tied weights to his ankles and went out and drowned himself in the swimming pool. There are other examples of suicide as a direct result of what they learned in class. I hope you noticed on that 3-hour ABC docudrama on teenage suicide a few weeks ago, which was so dreary, the last words that those high school students said to each other before they turned on the gas in the garage. They said, "There is no place to go. It doesn't matter what we do. The whole world's going to blow up soon anyway." Now you watched 2 dreary hours of how bad and upset the parents were, but they didn't get that notion from their parents. Whatever defects their parents had, that wasn't one of them. That was something they learned in school. Here is a letter that was given to me by a mother who found a letter written by her 4th grade child with all the misspellings and bad grammar. It said, "Dear Mr. Reagan, are we going to have World War III? My mom says she hopes not. My teacher says she is sure we are. I hope we don't have one neither, but I know we will. Now, isn't that pitiful, what was told to that fourth grade child, that it doesn't have any future? You're going to get blown up under the bomb, and furthermore, that your parents are wrong. Another one of these techniques is what's called the forced choice quiz. Here's an example of an actual forced choice quiz given to the class by the teacher. The child is required to answer the question, even though there are no right answers. Ask the child, would you rather have to face the fact that A, you are an alcoholic, B, you are pregnant, C, you are homosexual, D, you have herpes? Pick one. This is supposed to teach them values and critical decision making, to use the jargon of what's going on at the present time. Then there have the life and death survival games, in which the child is given a list of people and asked to select which 4 of the 10 should be eliminated, that is, killed. Now, are you going to kill the 31-year-old bookkeeper, or the pregnant woman, or the black militant medical student, or the historian, or the college co-ed, or the rabbi, or the policeman with a gun? Whose life is left worthy, and who should be killed? That's the type of decisions they are forcing on the children. I met with the Department of Education, with the NEA and other educator groups who are pushing these courses. And they are now working very hard to repeal the law that makes these regulations possible. And this NEA representative said, these regulations are so terrible. They will interfere with everything the teacher is doing. We would not even be able to teach Hamlet. I said, Hamlet? I can guarantee that none of our people is going to object to reading Hamlet. Well, she said, after we read Hamlet, suppose we have a discussion, and the teacher asks the students, can you think of any circumstances under which you would commit suicide? And that's when I had a little tantrum on the spot, because Shakespeare's been read for centuries without any teacher asking students to figure out why they should commit suicide. These are some of the issues in education today. We have a powerful weapon to shape up the educational system and to get them back to teaching basic skills, how to read and write, and actual facts, instead of engaging in psychiatric meddling with the children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm informed by the organizers of the meeting that we have no time left for questions. I'm very sorry. Let's give all of our panel members a hand.
If everyone will take their seats, we'll continue with the program of this, the 12th Annual Conservative Political Action Conference. As chairman of the American Conservative Union, it's going to be my pleasure in a second to turn the microphone over to a member of our Board of Directors and a man with whom many of you have worked in years past, Mr. Louis Euler of California, who is a member of President Reagan's, then Governor Reagan's cabinet at one point in California, and who is best known to you as the chairman of the National Tax Limitation Committee. As I do that, for the purpose of his introduction to your next speaker, I would just like to say one thing. We talked yesterday and today about the progress that our movement has made and the people who've come out of the conservative movement. But as our success has grown, particularly under the leadership of now President Reagan, and as he enters his second term, many people who perhaps have not come out of the movement but who have demonstrated in the last years that they are as dedicated to the agenda that President Reagan has articulated as we are, and who have emerged as great friends of our movement and great friends of the organizations that we represent here today, have come to this town. When Mr. Reagan came to Washington, I was talking to Lou earlier, and I wanted to point out that one of the first things he did was address a breakfast meeting that was sponsored by the American Conservative Union. So those of us with ACU consider the man that Lou is going to be introducing a friend, and we have very high hopes for the future of this administration with him at the helm at the White House helping President Reagan implement the agenda that we all support. Lou?
Thank you, David. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Reagan, the economic report issued today indicates a thriving economy in a world of low inflation. This prosperity demonstrates the vision of Ronald Reagan. It's a vision of new technology, of reliance on private sector initiatives, of faith in the individuality of Americans, and of a fiscally responsible government, a government that will no longer overburden our free enterprise economy, but will remove the shackles of overregulation and overspending to free the greatest engine of progress ever known. We started this new beginning in the President's first term. Donald Reagan has the exciting challenge of completing the implementation of that vision. Don Reagan has enjoyed a life of success and accomplishment, but he was not born with a proverbial silver spoon in his mouth. He grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where his father was a railroad security guard. Don Reagan worked hard and was rewarded with a scholarship to Harvard. While classmate John F. Kennedy and others were doing the Hasty Pudding Club number, Don worked his way through school. We're all familiar with his accomplishments as a manager, but few realize he is also an entrepreneur. While at Harvard, he started a guide service for visitors and had as many as 17 fellow students working for him in that business. Let's see, Ed Meese went to Yale, Jim Baker to Princeton, now we rounded out with Harvard. And this is known as the anti-establishment administration? Don Reagan entered law school, but as the clouds of World War II darkened, he joined the Marine Corps. By 1944, he was the youngest line major on active duty in the Marine Corps. In 1946, Mr. Reagan signed on at Merrill Lynch as a trainee. Some 20 years later, he was its CEO. He steered his company into new, innovative areas, cutting through Wall Street bureaucracy and outmoded thinking to implement important and exciting new changes. He pioneered new, competitive broker fee structures. He changed the system from cartelism to capitalism. Don Reagan is truly a man who knows how to manage and implement. I'm personally excited because, as Secretary of the Treasury, Don Reagan actively and forcefully supported our tax limitation balanced budget amendment. As Chief of Staff, he will be in a position to put the full weight of the White House behind this measure, which has been given the highest priority by the President. Don Reagan's loyalty to the President and his policies has been unwavering. No one in the administration has been a better team player. It is that loyalty and commitment to the President's policies and the ability to get things done that is so heartening for this second Reagan term. And the team he's building in the White House, Rollins, Friedersdorf, and sakes alive, Pat Buchanan. I think this second term is going to be fun times, and I think we're going to have a new motto or a new call to arms. And that will be, if we let Reagan be Reagan, that will assure that Reagan will be Reagan. I give you not a troika, but a single chief of staff, the Honorable Don Regan.
Thank you, Lou. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate this opportunity to be with you again. These are exciting times. Due to your efforts and those of President Reagan, more and more people are being brought into the conservative fold. We see it everywhere, on our campuses, blue-collar workers, various ethnic groups, churches. Just yesterday, Phyllis Schlafly was telling me about her trips to the campuses, and where years ago she found that three-quarters would be hostile, she's now finding a majority are very supportive of our causes. I'm proud to be part of the team that Ronald Reagan has put together for this second term. We're rich in diversity, but we're unified in purpose. And I can tell you today, there really isn't anything strange about Don Regan Wall Streeter having Pat Buchanan, a man who's given a new meaning to the word hardcore, to a top position at the White House. We're both Reaganauts. These last 4 years have been some of the most fulfilling years of my life. I've come to appreciate just how much work and effort went into laying the foundation of the Reagan Revolution. I'm grateful to those of you in this room for your tenacity, for sticking to your conservative beliefs long before it was fashionable to do so. And I'm grateful to President Reagan, a decent and courageous man, for letting me be part of a great enterprise to change the course of history. What we've got here, or rather when we got here, Americans were being told that we were facing unsolvable problems and we were destined for defeat. The experts were saying it would take 10 years just to wring inflation out of the system. By the way, do you know what an expert is? I think he's a person that can give you every reason in the book why something cannot take place. Well, we shocked them. We did get inflation out of the system. We got it out in the first 2 years of Ronald Reagan's administration, and we kept it out for the next 2. Now, we've got to do it for the next 4. One of the great things about working for President Reagan is his emphasis on the positive, his insistence on can-do, and let's find a way. There's a plaque on his desk in the Oval Office which reads, "It can be done," and "can" is in high brackets. Now, his spirit, devotion to principle, and deep faith in people are propelling America into a new era. Today, a growing coalition is rallying around a core of ideas which have been researched, debated, chronicled, and advocated by conservative and libertarian intellectuals. Much of what we're proposing can be traced back to discussions that took place years ago in the editorial offices of the National Review and Human Events, or in research projects of the Heritage Foundation or the Hoover Institution. Today, we're building on their work. As Isaac Newton said, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. The principles which serve us as a standard are not exclusive of any economic class, any race, or any religion. They embrace all who love liberty and the ideals of our founding fathers. During the 1980 campaign, President Reagan spoke of family, work, neighborhood, peace, and freedom. The promise to return these fundamental values was at the heart of the Republican election victory in 1980 and again in 1984. Liberal Democrats have been saying that the outcome of these last 2 elections was determined by the personalities of the candidates. I hope you all join me in encouraging them to continue to think in those terms. Even this president as great a communicator as he is, and as likable personality as he is, could not have triumphed with policies of higher taxes, busing children from their neighborhoods, and bending over backwards to the Soviets. President Reagan emerged victorious because he reflected the concerns that are at the heart of America. Concerns about neighborhoods that are no longer safe, and a criminal justice system that was no longer working. Concerns about the moral fabric of a country that doesn't permit its children to voluntarily pray in public schools. Concerns about the cavalier attitude of people who claim abortion is a woman's right, but cannot even give a second thought to the possibility that abortion is the taking of a human life. The opposition offered emotional phrases about the plight of the poor and unveiled plans for government controls and regulations as a means of helping them. We, of course, totally reject the notion that controlling and regulating people is the way to a better life. Socialism and central planning don't work. To prove this, one only need examine the consistent Soviet economic disasters compared to the successes of non-communist countries. There really is no explanation, unless you believe they really did suffer 68 years of bad luck, which is about as believable as Bella Abzug taking a shine to Jerry Falwell. But seriously, there is no reason to believe that more government leads to a better life. Our founding fathers knew better. President Reagan is fond of the Jefferson quote, which says, "Were we directed from Washington when to sow and when to reap, we should soon want for bread." The American people believe in free enterprise because it's consistent with their values and because it works. I won't repeat the statistics, but last year was the best economic year most Americans have enjoyed in their adult lives. More Americans are working now than ever before in our history. We have high growth and low inflation, a combination most countries strive for but never get. This was not accomplished because America had a president who mustered the power of government. Our success has been based on President Reagan's ability to activate the energy and the talents of American people. We freed local and state government, small businessmen, entrepreneurs, builders, job creators, from millions of hours of needless red tape and federal regulation. Instead of letting built-in tax increases continue to sap the strength, we passed a 25% across-the-board cut in income tax rates. Instead of doling out ever larger amounts of tax dollars to special interests, we took the first steps to bring down the growth of federal spending. There's an old saying that if you don't keep moving forward, you're bound to fall back. That goes for all of us at this moment. We must not sit content with what has been accomplished. The continued health of our economy requires more than resting in place. Teddy Roosevelt once said, "Aggressive fighting for the right is the noblest sport that the world can afford." Well, Teddy's right, and I wish he were here to help us in the next few months. But luckily, we've got a leader who, at least in my opinion, is the best bully pulpit man since Teddy. For 2 decades, we've had major political figures claiming that government can do everything for everybody. Now we're stuck with the responsibility for breaking the bad news, and it will require teamwork on the part of all of us. We must continue to come up with creative alternatives to the federal spending programs. Conservatives inside and outside the administration have been in the forefront of this approach. Getting control of spending also means wringing every bit of waste out of the system. A great deal has been accomplished, but there's still much more to do. Our block grant program has been a success, but here too, there are still federal programs that can be more efficiently handled by state and local governments. Finally, there are programs that are doing some good that we just cannot afford. We need your strong support in all these areas if federal spending is to be brought under control. Now, don't let anyone suggest that we're just the bad news guys. In reality, we're the folks who are keeping open the door of opportunity. We're the ones offering hope for the future. Our opponents seem to be saying, spend today, and as for tomorrow, well, we'd better hope. We're laying the foundation for a better tomorrow, and we've got nothing to apologize about today. Our tax reform and simplification efforts are aimed at minimizing complication and maximizing incentives. We're going to bring down people's tax rates even more than they are currently. We're going to bring money out of unproductive tax shelters and give people greater incentives to invest and to save. We're going to keep America the greatest economic power that the world has ever known. Our success over the past 2 years is the marvel and the envy of the rest of the world. We're working to keep it that way. One of the fundamental concepts upon which President Reagan has built this administration is the relationship between freedom and human progress. Internationally, the President has pointed out time and time again the disaster that communism has been to the Third World. Encouraging business investment and free enterprise has thus become the focus of our efforts in the developing countries. So too is supporting those who are putting their lives on the line in the cause of freedom. In the coming months, let me assure you that securing American aid for those fighting for freedom in Nicaragua has our highest priority. Their fight is our fight. They indeed are our brothers in the cause of human freedom. Now at home, the relationship between freedom and progress is no less important. America will remain strong and secure if we have faith in our people and courage to remain true to our principles. The American people have never let us down. Today, our coalition is recognized by most Americans as a powerful force for good. Under President Reagan's leadership, we've come a long way. We're on the same road and we're pulling in the same direction. But we've got a longer way to go. We're not finished yet. Not even half done. There's a lot more ahead. That's why Ronald Reagan ran for re-election. That's why I'm here. And that's what the second term is all about. Thank you for your help. Thank you for letting me be your guest today. And thank you most of all for the great support we're counting on you to give in the days ahead.
You want to just field them yourself? Okay. Thank you very much. And now Mr. Reagan has consented to respond to questions. So if you'll hold up your hand and he will recognize and respond to those.
I notice there are microphones here in the center. Perhaps we could utilize the mics, probably make it easier for all of us to hear the questions. Go ahead, sir.
Secretary Reagan, in 1981...
Mic's not on. Could we get that mic on? Go ahead.
I don't believe it's working.
Well, go ahead. We can hear you. Or I'll fill it from up here and repeat it.
In 1981, in my perception, the cart was put before the horse. Before we had the tax cuts, we should have gutted the welfare state and the bureaucracy that the welfare state supports to eliminate or to avoid the huge deficits that we have. Now, my question is, are we going to set a priority to cut the spending before we change the taxes? And are we going to really push on the balanced budget amendment before we change the taxes? Thank you.
The gentleman's question is this. In 1981, we seemed to have put the cart before the horse that we had a tax cut before we succeeded in bringing down federal spending and gutting the welfare state. And the question he asks is, what are we going to do in 1985? Which is going to come first? Let me assure you that deficit reduction is our main goal for this year. The tax bill that we will have this year, which has equal priority as far as necessity is concerned, but has less priority in a time sequence. The deficit reduction package will come first, the tax package second, later this year after the deficit package. That will not be a tax raiser nor a tax decreaser. It will be tax neutral, but it will simplify the code, and we hope make it end up in a much fairer way and a much easier method of our raising whatever sums of money are necessary to carry on a minimum of government. Next question.
Mr. Reagan, we in Texas are glad you're in Washington, I'll tell you that. We, in considering your leadership role in passing the Garn-St. Germain Act in 1983, I would like your perception of the recent actions of Chairman Gray and the Federal Home Loan Bank to re-regulate our savings loan industry.
The question the gentleman raises is that he says he approves of what we did in some aspects of financial deregulation in the Garn-St. Germain Bill of 1983, but wonders what he thinks, what we think in terms of the efforts of the Savings and Loan Association to re-regulate that industry. My answer is a guarded one. First, it's not much. That's the first answer. And the second one is that I do think that some elements of the savings and loan institutions need some further regulation because some aspects of it were getting out of hand. But by and large, that industry needs help, not further regulation.
Sir, right now, homosexual males are transmitting AIDS and other dangerous sexually transmitted diseases all over the United States and the world. What is your administration doing or planning to do to protect the general public from these dangerous men?
Well, quite obviously, through the Public Health Service, HHS, and others, we are spreading the word of the contagious nature of this disease. We're trying to work through various medical units to see what can be done to prevent the spread of that disease, and certainly we are warning regarding it. As far as legislation is concerned, I am not aware of any priority that we have on legislation in that area.
Mr. Reagan, excuse me.
He's Reagan, I'm Reagan.
I knew you wouldn't be offended by that mistake. You gave an absolutely
well, as long as he learns to spell his name correctly, it'll be all right.
Your speech was so terrific. It really thrilled us all, I'm sure. and I'm so glad you said there's so much more to be done. And what I have to say about cutting spending relates to what the gentleman just before me said, because there's a great deal of overspending caused by the feminist movement that we must get a handle on and stop. And I'd like to. I'm from Minnesota, and this is why it is.
What happened?
Well, what happened is that we have so many feminists in so many posts there, and in so many bureaucratic jobs, and in both houses of the legislature, and this really is a very serious matter. The feminists have perpetrated three hoaxes. The first was ERA, the second was comparable worth, but the third is the worst and the most horrible and the one that's costing the most money. Comparable worth is an expensive thing. We're spending an awful lot of money on that in Minnesota, and it's ridiculous. But the third hoax of the feminists is a very, very dangerous thing, and I'd like to...
Ma'am,
yes?
we have this, Mr. Regan's time just for a very short period of time. Let's have precise questions
All
to
right.
which he can respond.
My question
please.
is, can you stop the money earmarked for child abuse investigation? I'll tell you what happened in Minnesota. Oh, all right. I just want to tell you that that they are trying to make the heterosexual normal family look bad in order to try to let the homosexuals look good by contrast. They have taken over 40 children out of their homes in one small community in Minnesota.
Could I respond on the general line of family and things of that nature? As you know, there isn't a person in the world who is more pro-family than President Reagan. And I can assure you that in our budget, in our philosophy and everything else, we'll definitely be pro-family. We're not for oddball groups. Next question.
I'm against child abuse. Just
So am I. We agree.
I'm talking about innocent people that were arrested.
We have the next question.
Right.
My name is Trương Quang Sĩ. I'm a refugee from Vietnam. My classmate from the United States Air Force officer were missing in Vietnam. This is my 7th question. That means 7th time I attend the Conservative Political Action Conference. As you mentioned, your administration support for the liberation of the Nicaraguan people. That's perfect. But how about the United States prisoners still keep on hand of the communists in Vietnam? Please mention that and remind President Reagan about that. Don't forget them. They are your brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make this quick. There have been numerous reports in publications regarding the tax reform bills proposed by both the Democrats, the Republicans, and your Treasury bill, that by the time the lobbyists get through with it, that it would not really resemble what has been proposed. And I'd like your comments as to how doable the proposals are, given the political structure as we have it right now with the lobbyists.
The three main proposals in tax reform, Kemp-Kasten, Bradley Gephardt, and the Treasury, have a lot of similarity. I'd say 60, 65, even 70%. They are similar. They differ in several aspects. Right now, that's Jim Baker's job as Secretary of the Treasury. He's been tasked by the President in the State of the Union message to try to harmonize, if possible, all three of those. If he cannot, then to work out with the Ways and Means Committee in the House and the Finance Committee in the Senate some alternative that is accomplishable. Naturally, as one of the authors of the Treasury proposal, I'm prejudiced. I don't mind admitting it. But I also am a realist and a pragmatist. I know that the entire Treasury package is not going to succeed as written. But what we should try to do, is to preserve the essence of it, which is to reduce rates for all people by closing off the shelters that the few have enjoyed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Regan, on the tax reform proposal, again, that was drafted when you were Secretary of the Department of Treasury, I've noticed in the press that, ironically, the liberals are supporting the elimination of the corporate welfare provisions in the tax code, and the conservatives seem to be attacking the elimination. I think from the free enterprise perspective, conservatives need to support that package that you put together, specifically regarding the elimination of corporate welfare tax provisions. I was wondering if you could tell me, from your background in market investments, whether the elimination of the tax-exempt status for private issue industrial revenue bonds was motivated primarily by concern for the misinvestment which they are causing, especially being issued by state and local development authorities.
Industrial revenue bonds had a time and a place, but I think they've outlived their usefulness. They have now become literally just an interest subsidy for corporate America, and they have led to subsidizing wealthy people like myself who can buy them and enjoy a tax-free status. I see no reason to either subsidize corporate America and give them lower rates of interest than you and I can borrow from at the bank, nor do I see any reason to subsidize the rich in that form. From the point of view of industrial revenue bonds, I think that the savings that we could make there could be applied and should be applied to reducing revenue rates, tax rates for everybody. I think that's the proper way to go about it. I've got time for two more.
Mr. Reagan?
Yes, sir.
I'm here to let us give praise to Walter Mondale for running for President of the United States. It was the greatest asset to the Republican Party that's ever happened since Harry Truman. Thank God Johnny Carson didn't run. And I understand that Johnny's going to run in '88. And to get the Catholic vote, we're going to have McMahon. That'll get the Catholics. So we got a lot of work to do. Well, anyhow, I happen to be a farmer. My mother and father were great friends of Ronald Reagan's father and mother. And as far as these farmers are concerned, don't feel sorry for us. We're making lots of money. And as they stand out there and create the disaster, don't believe them.
Do you have a question?
Thank God we're getting rid of the big spenders.
Do you have a question, sir?
What?
That's his question. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Mr. Reagan, first,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Reagan, first of all, a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. I think your speech is
I've only
great.
got time. I've got about 3 minutes, so if I'm going to get you on the guy
Okay,
behind
the
you.
question,
what's
the
the
question,
please?
a couple of questions. The first question is, what are the chances of instituting a line item veto for the president?
Reasonably good this year. Your next question?
The second thing is that I know that William Bennett is an excellent Secretary of Education, but what are the chances of at least phasing out a good part of the department, if not eventually abolishing it altogether?
The Education Department?
Yes.
That is something that we have seriously under consideration. You know, we tried to do it in the first 2 years, and Congress wouldn't allow us. And over the next 4 years, we'll still be working on that item. We're not going to give up. He's the last one. Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't remember the exact code section number, but in...
if you don't, I don't, because I'm not a lawyer. But go ahead.
But since President Reagan campaigned against the marriage tax, and insofar as it does tend toward preserving family values according to some, I'm just wondering, did your proposal seek to eliminate the two-earner marriage deduction, and it did?
Yes.
Okay, do you think that will go through?
What we tried to do is to make that a fairer type of thing by upping the personal exemptions and the like, so there wouldn't be the disparity between two single incomes and the married income. It is not exactly even, but I think it's much fairer under our proposal than it is even currently, and you know in 1984 we tried to improve that. So I think that no matter which one of the tax systems goes into effect through tax simplification, a better break for a married couple with two incomes will be had.
Do you think that will succeed in passing?
Yes, definitely. Well, I wish I could stay here all day, but as you can imagine, I do have a tight schedule. Again, I appreciate you having me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Don Regan. And you can see with a twinkle in his eye and good humor in his voice and a willingness to respond to any comments or questions, why it's going to be a lot of fun in the White House. I've been asked to make one announcement, and that is that you were all distributed a poll yesterday. It's supposed to be turned in to any Cpac staffer with a blue badge on by 8 p.m. this evening. Thank you.